Now, there is widespread concern that the number of children living in child-headed households is rapidly increasing as a result of AIDS-related deaths in sub-Saharan Africa. The University of Johannesburg conducted a study and found that there is an alarming large number of these children in schools. The research found that they are vulnerable from material, social and psychological perspective. Now, what does this actually mean? To discuss this, we are joined in studio by Professor Jace Pillay, the South African Research Chair in Education and Care and Childhood at the University of Johannesburg. Professor, very good morning to you and welcome.
Good morning to you.
Now, Prof, what is a child-headed household?
I think defining and conceptualizing child-headed households is a contentious issue. And the main reason being, from an African context, some may argue that this is not a problem because it takes a village to raise a child. And in thinking in that kind of way, they will not see it as a problem. But in terms of what is the most acceptable kind of definition, will be that it's a household that's headed by a person under the age of 18 who takes full responsibility in terms of the day-to-day management of that particular household.
Okay, so and it's a school-going child, or not
Absolutely.
necessarily?
It would be a school-going child mainly.
Now, with the advent of ARVs, why is AIDS then still a problem and cause children to being orphaned and to head these child-headed households?
I think firstly, the attitude towards sexual intimacy is still a problem. People do not see the need for using safety measures. Also, the attitude towards ARVs itself is also very problematic. But if I was to link it up to in terms of my research, what we're seeing is, for example, that girls from the child-headed households are actually being exploited. They become vulnerable, especially to older men and married men in the community who say that under the pretext that I will protect you or I'll give you some money for the day to feed the younger ones for sexual favors.
Is that the sugar daddy syndrome?
Something like that, but I think it's more than just that. It's just total violation and exploitation of young girls because you want to give them a sense of safety and security and also little money so that they could feed and eat for that particular day.
What is the impact of this particular challenge on the affected children in the communities?
In our research, we are seeing a considerable amount of impact. We've firstly looked at a lot of psychological consequences, a lot of educational consequences, and also social impact as well. If I was to very briefly tell you in terms of the psychological, we're definitely seeing an increase in terms of anxiety, depression, stress, vulnerability experienced by these children in particular. But also I must highlight that we're also seeing that there is resilience as well.
Yes.
And I think in our research, not to be demoralized, we are capitalizing on the resilience part to see that how we could support these children. So in terms of the social impact, you find that children have problems with regard to relating to others for many reasons. And maybe if time permits, I will share some of that.
Now, let's look at the problem. How widespread is it here in South Africa, first and foremostly, and then we can also move to sub-Saharan Africa for that matter?
I think the statistics in South Africa is a bit controversial, and for some of the reasons that I've just indicated. And I think also the kind of studies that we have done do not give us a very good or accurate picture of what the statistics are. There are many studies that have been done that indicate there is a constant escalation in terms of the numbers. There are studies that are also done that indicates that there is no increase or maybe a decline, and some of them say that it's still stagnant. I think the most reliable source will be the general household surveys that has been was conducted over the years from 2002, 2006, and even 2011 and 12. Those studies clearly indicate there is a problem in terms of the numbers. Yes. It may not necessarily be significant in terms of the total population of children in the country of 18 billion, but it's still important enough for us to be able to take seriously. I think I must also point out that in terms of action and intervention, we cannot depend just solely on statistics. We need to be looking at the quality in terms of the care that we provide. Yeah. And if we're going to be dictated by statistics, we're probably going to lose sight of many, many children who are so important in our society.
How big was the sample in terms of your research that was done?
We conducted qualitative research mainly because we wanted to know exactly what are these children's experiences. So we wanted to probe deeper into them. There were numerous individual interviews, focus group interviews, and other means of collecting the data. So it was more qualitative in nature. And in qualitative research, the focus is not on the numbers, but in terms of the quality of information that we get. And what we get in is definitely something that I definitely would not expect to get in some of the quantitative studies that we have done.
And what did you find?
We are finding serious problems in terms of education, for example. We find that many of these children actually stay absent from school because they have to be on the streets trying to get bread to eat for the day or to feed the younger siblings. We also find that they do not have enough education supplies. They do not have school uniforms. They use the same uniform and go to school every single day, and they have a bad odor, and other children mock and tease them, so they just don't want to interact and engage with other children. We also find that there's a clear lack of understanding with regard to teachers, with regard to these children, because they expect the same things from these children, not understanding the circumstances that they have to live on a daily basis. So these children are kind of compared to other children and expected to perform in the same way. And this actually demoralizes them, and they don't want to go to school.
So they become outcast. But now, how does the community, or how can the community assist in order to make a difference?
I think the community has to play a very, very pivotal role in this. And I think government alone cannot actually do this. We need to work together in terms of combining resources, whether they're material or financial, and work together in terms of doing this. I think at the community level, there's a lot of things that could be done. Our community organizations, and there are many that are actually doing this at the moment, our religious organizations, our NGOs, our civic organizations, all need to work jointly and strategically in terms of looking at providing support. A simple thing as just providing food and clothing on a daily basis is a start for these children.
Now, you did mention psychological issues, but there's also the material and social aspects which you touched briefly on. Is there anything else that I've missed out in terms of your research that you found?
Our studies particularly focus on the psychological, social, and the educational aspects. So it does cover all of that. I think an important thing that is also emerging is the cultural aspect and the cultural response in terms of children, orphans, and vulnerable children. And one of the things that we're finding quite consistently is the absence of male models, role models. And we find even in the orphanages that we've interviewed, children that we interviewed, boys seem to be lost because they do not have adequate and proper role models that they could emulate on a regular basis. And even there's complaints from the orphanages and other institutions that we've interviewed that there's not enough male social workers, for example. Right? And what do we do with these children? Because for the girls, we are able to do that, because mainly there's females that seems to be concerned about these issues. So that's something I think that we also need to be looking at.
Now, with any research, there must be some recommendations. What are some of the key recommendations that you've come up with?
Our key recommendation is to look at a community-based approach in terms of support and strategies. We obviously saying that government needs to take the lead in terms of these support programs, because policies and directives need to be adjusted and modified according to the needs of the children. But I think we need to be working together in terms of how we do this. We can't work in silos, and even within government sectors themselves, we need to have an integrated approach in terms of the different departments that exist. The Department of Education does its own thing, the Department of Health does its own thing, and we just repeat and duplicate and waste resources. So there has to be a joint strategy in terms of how government brings on board all the community organizations and all the resources that exist in community to work together. For ultimately, an investment in the early education and the development of these children is undoubtedly going to have a positive impact in terms of the economy of the country itself.
Professor, thank you so much for joining us here and enlightening us on children that's heading child-headed households. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
That was Professor Jace Pillay, the South African Research Chair in Education and Care in Childhood. Tragic story. He's at the University of Johannesburg chatting to us about child-headed households. And you can probably make a difference as well.